All right. I get to speak on anxiety tonight. We're in our mental health series. This is going to be a lot of fun. I have to say that I kept having this moment of comedy because I was like, I'm having anxiety about speaking about anxiety tonight. I'm nervous about it. I can feel it in my tingly fingers right now. And I was like, oh man, I've got anxiety. But I'm really excited to talk about anxiety tonight. And there's a lot to say about it. So before I even get going though, I want to honor the Tehillah leadership team. There's a team of people behind the scenes that really pour into this place. And the people in front of the scenes that you do see. But I really appreciate that they decided to value the conversation around mental health specifically enough to have a whole series about it. Because I don't know if you've been in a mental health series in a church before. My guess is probably not. It's not normal, and it's really tricky to talk about. So I really, really just wanted to honor James and Cody and Jer and Adam and all these guys and ladies who are running Tehillah behind the scene. So yeah, let's dive right in. So the Christian church, specifically those of us from a Protestant background, are typically really bad at negative emotions and holding space for them. A perfect example of this is on Good Friday. How many of you ever have been on a Good Friday service? Everybody, mostly, some. Okay, lots of you though. So traditionally in Catholic and more Lutheran and different traditional places, Good Friday is very somber. It's very sober because we're remembering the day that Jesus died and hope was lost and the world wondered if anything was going to ever be good again. That's what we're holding space for. And then, Jesus rises. But if you've ever been to a Pentecostal Good Friday or a Charismatic Good Friday, you're lucky if we get one verse of doom and gloom moment and then hallelujah, praise the one. We're right there. So we love to celebrate, and I love that, but it kind of says we might not be good at holding space for some harder emotions, some more challenging ones. We live in an era right now in church history and in human history, but really I want to focus on church, where we're mostly told that if we're experiencing unhappiness or we're experiencing depression or anxiety or loneliness or anger or the other challenging emotions, the ones you don't want to tell people that you have right now, we think that something's wrong with us, or we're told that something's wrong with us. Oh, you just need to pray more. You just need to come up here and get prayer and you won't be angry anymore. You need to come up here and get prayer and now you won't be depressed. And it's going to be great for you. And I think sometimes that happens because God is sovereign. He's good. He's kind. He's patient. He's loving. He's all these things. And he's just sometimes yeah, I'm taking that from you. You got this. But most of the time, emotions are existing for a reason. And, we as Christians tend to misuse the Bible as well. We hear one verse don't be anxious. And so we're walking around telling everybody I'm feeling pretty anxious today. We're well, don't be anxious. I got it. You're good. If you just don't be anxious, then you're set. And it's so simple, you guys. So you can go home now. And honestly, don't forget to give on the way out and you're good to go. You're welcome. So we're saying this to people, but then we hide our true selves, and we're the ones feeling anxious. We're the ones who are angry, but we don't show them that. We show them our best self. Maybe we slap in a little Botox to make sure nobody can ever tell what we're actually feeling. And then next thing you know, we're two different people. Church, one person. Home, different person. And we're trying to look good doing it. Before we really jump into anything, though, I just want to confess to you guys my greatest fear tonight. So before I go anywhere, I do have a really big fear speaking on this message. And that fear is that I end up joining with the voices of pastors and churches and Christians that have told you before, for those of you who are dealing with mental health, that there's something is wrong with you and you just need this answer, and I just dismiss you. That's my greatest fear, is that in this conversation, it ends up being dismissive, and you end up being belittled, and you end up being dismissed. I just don't want that. I'm really worried about that. So I wanted to confess that straight out so you know where I'm coming from. And I want you to know that my greatest value is you. And I'm sorry that anyone else has othered you or made you feel not as good as the other people in the room. But tonight, we're just going to hold space for everybody, however they're coming. If you're coming with, say you have a mental health diagnosed disorder, or maybe you have just some stuff going on right now, whatever you have, I just want to say that there's space for that. And if you're doing awesome, I'm stoked for you. That's awesome. Congrats. So there's room for everybody is what I want to say. And then just to give you a little bit of background about me. So I decided to go back to school a couple of years ago. I wasn't going to do that. I always planned to be a counselor someday. That's always been my long-term goal. Someday I'm going to be a counselor. But I wanted to do that when I had a little bit more silver, a little bit more wisdom, look to myself, that sage, when you go and you talk to that old person who's full of wisdom. I was hoping to maybe wait for that. But during COVID lockdowns, I just felt like, I think the time has come. It's just too obvious that we need counselors right now. So I dove back into school, and surprisingly, in school, I also really loved biblical studies. I guess that shouldn't be surprising. I'm up here. If that's surprising, that's actually bad. But I did. I didn't expect it. It surprised me. I didn't expect it. And so I ended up doing 2 degrees at the same time. I did a Master in Christian Ministry and a Master in Counseling. And so I'm finishing the Master in Counseling right now. I'm in my practicum, just getting out in the world, getting my hands dirty. It's the best. So I'm loving it. So that's where I'm coming from tonight. I'm really passionate about 2 things. I'm really passionate about God and his people, and that can look 2 different ways. It can look through a lens of theology, where we're looking at the way God views humanity and the way God describes himself, and we can look through it through the lens of psychology, which is the understanding of people. So I want to say that I'm hoping to hold both tonight, and so we'll kind of dip into psychology, we'll kind of dip into some theology, but we're going to hold it as tight as we can and make it make sense. So let's pray, and we'll get into it. So Father in heaven, the one who loves us, the one who formed me in my mother's womb and every single person here, the one who knit us together with love and intentionality and kindness and knew us before we ever knew ourselves or anyone else. You, God, you saw us, you saw me, and we love you for it. And so, Holy Spirit, I ask that tonight, as we just engage with emotions and we engage with thought, I ask, Father, that you would guide us and lead us, that you would open our hearts to the word, you would open our hearts to the movements of your Spirit, the way that you're forming us and changing us, and that nothing that is from you would fall to the ground and fall to the wayside tonight, but every seed of hope and love that is from Jesus would be planted in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay. I think we have some slides. Do we have slides? Okay, they said, yeah, we do. All right. So we're going to jump into some statistics. That's hard for me to say. So Stats Canada report for 2022 said that over 5 million people in Canada during the previous 12 months had a diagnosable mental health condition. Okay, that's 18% of the Canadian population. That's essentially 2 in 10 or 1 in 5. Out of these approximately 5 million people experiencing a mental health disorder, anxiety often sits highest as the most prevalent concern in Canada. Anxiety does also include phobias. If you look at the DSM-5, the rule book, it says that anxiety disorders are included with phobias and fears and things like that. Yeah, so that's millions of people that are experiencing some form of diagnosable anxiety disorder. Unfortunately, only half of those people receive any help from a medical or health professional in any way. Only half. And out of that half, only 36.6% of those people, out of that, only 36.6% of people say they actually only had partially or fully unmet needs through what they received. So half of the people didn't even talk to anyone, and then even half of that didn't really receive any help. So we have a lot of people who are just kind of staggering through life and are extremely affected in their mental health, but they don't really know who to talk to or what to do, or maybe they can't afford services, things like that. So there is a health crisis right now, but we're acting like it's out there somewhere. We're like, yeah, it's really bad, out there, but thank God we have Jesus. But there's a stat from Lifeway Research Group, which was interesting to me. 26% of pastors reported that they have endured a mental illness or disorder. That's interesting. And then if we also look at, the ages are 15 to 24, where they're the highest in mental health disorders and mental health concerns. And it's specifically mostly highest in women. So women between the ages of 15 and 24 are the highest statistical mental health people who are struggling right now. And then you look in this room and you're like, well, If 1 in 5 people are struggling, 26% of pastors are saying they have some form of mental health concern. It's probably all over the place, am I right? This is not something that sits outside of this room. So we all know that gender and race and location and family factors, social factors, economic factors, physical health factors, traumatic experiences all play a part in our overall health. So my friends, if you're experiencing challenges in your mental health right now, you are not alone. So what is anxiety and why does it matter? So like Cody said last week, this is not just a mental health crisis, this is a health crisis that we're in. We are not able to separate our physical bodies from our minds and our emotions. You just can't do that. The labels we use, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, they just define the area that we're talking about so that we can get specific in our conversation. But we truly are just one person. You're just one person. You're one being. And you have either health or you have a lack of health. And that's just the fact. There's no way to separate it. So what is anxiety? I mean, I feel like we've all had that TikTok influencer or the YouTuber tell us, this is anxiety, and this is how it is for me, and I'm an expert because I felt it once. So we've all had that, and I'm like, you probably are, you know some things, it's true. But it makes it really confusing because there's just this I don't know what, this cornucopia of information out there, and you're like, I don't know if I can trust any of that. I don't know if any of that's even true. And so you have this dilemma of we all hear this word anxiety and we think totally different things. And that makes it pretty challenging. So I'm going to use, just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to use the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, for all of my definitions and for all of our understanding in this beginning stuff. Are you guys with me? Yes. Is this too much? Okay. Great, thank you. That's awesome. Okay, anxiety. Anxiety, welcome. So anxiety is a normal reaction to stress. Just catch that. Anxiety is a normal reaction to stress. It is an emotional state characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes. Anxiety is defined as a future-oriented negative mood state, characterized by bodily symptoms of physical tension and by apprehension about the future. A key feature of the apprehension is related to the sense that the person cannot control what's coming. Okay? In many situations, anxiety can be a helpful response as it prepares the body to deal with changes and increases alertness and focus. For example, if you're preparing for a job and you're worried if you're going to get the job, in theory, that little bit of worry is going to make you I'm going to try a little harder. I'm going to prepare. I'm going to know that I'm going to maybe do a practice interview. Or you are anxious about a test, you prepare for it. That's the idea. But I'll get ahead on that later. At its highest intensity, and when prolonged, anxiety can begin to cause physical reactions, such as heart palpitations, chest pain, feelings of shortness of breath, shaking, numbness and tingling, dizziness, nausea, and more. That's at its highest point. As a function, so this is why we have it, anxiety exists to alert us of incoming danger and potential threats. That's why we have anxiety. So we should have anxiety, maybe. Maybe that's okay. So again, this is the bottom line. Anxiety is a normal reaction to a stressful situation, ultimately letting you know something is wrong. Okay, I want to say that again because this is the most important. You have to get this for everything else. So anxiety is a normal reaction to stressful situations, ultimately letting you know something is wrong. That's it. That's what anxiety is, okay? So now we get anxiety and fear kind of confused a lot of the time. So they're not the same. They tend to be BFFs that come together to the party, but they're not the same. So anxiety is considered a future-oriented, like I said, long-acting response that's broadly focused on a diffuse threat, whereas fear is an appropriate, present-oriented, and short-lived response to a clearly identifiable threat. So fear is, oh no, there's a bear, run. That's fear, and that's so good. Anxiety is oh man, I could possibly see a bear. And then it might eat me, but keep me alive for a while, and then I would suffer. So if I don't get bear spray, I might lose one leg and half my arm. Like, that's the difference. It's future-oriented versus like, oh, look, a bear. So that's kind of what we're talking there. So some people characterize the distinction more particularly, proposing that fear is experienced when avoiding or escaping an aversive stimuli, and that anxiety is experienced when entering a potentially dangerous situation. Okay, that's what I was describing there. So what is the purpose of anxiety? Anxiety is an alert system. It's letting you know that something is wrong or something is coming. It's an alert system. It's a message. It's actually a really helpful emotional state because a little anxiety, like I said, towards like an exam or a job helps you prepare. But when you have too much anxiety, it actually shuts down like the creative side of your brain, and then you can't really think about anything. And then you start to get more panicked, and then you're in that state of like fight or flight, and you don't know what to do, and everything's getting crazy. I'm just kidding. But it does that. And it's not helpful. So we can end up in that state of fight or flight, which means you're in survival mode, and you really aren't able to function. You become dysregulated. Your heart rate goes up. Internal focus becomes just about safety. I'll add this just as a little token and tidbit. I've always felt like, when you're like hurting, you can really only see yourself. You're really self-focused. I just want to just leave you with this. Pain will make you selfish. It's okay for a while, and that's fine for a while, but long-term, pain makes you selfish, and it's not going to work for you forever. Thank you. Wow, I didn't expect that. Where was I? Now it's important, yes. Okay, so it's important to note that your brain and your body, they don't always communicate super well. So they don't know the difference between a life-threatening situation and that job interview I mentioned before. It's like it kind of can register at the same level because it's what you give meaning to. So if you're giving high levels of meaning to something, then it's really important. And your brain it'll calculate anxiety to the level that you're holding that importance, okay? So it's a flag system in your body, and it's completely personal to you. So what gives me anxiety might not give you anxiety. And when somebody is experiencing it, they're like, I'm freaking out about my relationship, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, why? Calm down. Like, it's no big deal. You have different value systems internally. It's not going to be the same for everybody. It doesn't have to be. And it would be almost impossible to make that way because you're so unique. So anxiety is an alert system, and it is meant to invoke curiosity. Okay, so you receive an alert system. A lot of us are like, in our culture, a lot of us are like, shove that down, not going to worry about that right now. And then you're dealing with it in 3 years. But anxiety is an alert system that's meant to invoke curiosity. Once we get curious about anxiety, we can learn what it's saying. So when you get that flag of like, oh, I am so blank, I'm feeling, the hope and the goal and the education, like the learning moment, is to get curious about it. Like, why do I feel that right now? If it's really an internal communication tool, like if I believe this, and I do, if it's really a communication tool, then it has to have a message, because it's not communicating nothing. So there has to be a message, and it's communicating something. So then when we can learn what it's saying, we can begin to unravel that thought and that emotion more logically and with kindness. Possibly even invite other voices into it, and even check its accuracy. Because we all know that a lot of the things that we really get anxious about aren't even real. But we don't know that. Somebody else sometimes has to tell us that. And it's really helpful. So curiosity will always lead to questions. So here's some questions that you could begin to ask yourself. You're feeling anxious. Maybe you don't even know why. I'm kind of the guy who will feel anxious and then be like, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Why am I feeling anxious? So these are some good questions to ask yourself. Why do I feel anxious? Start there. Why? What is causing the anxiety in this moment? Can I put my finger on it? Is there just a thing that happened? Is it like something obvious? When did I notice the symptoms of anxiety starting? If I think about it, if I slow down, I slow my mind, my body down, when do I remember that? Is there a pattern where I feel anxious in the same place or situation? That one, you're looking for some deep stuff. Is this anxiety logical? Are there any facts to support my current opinion here? That's a good question. If it was true, at that point, is it still true now? Because just because something was true at one point doesn't mean it's still true now. We should check that out. What would I say to this anxiety, these concerns, these worries, if they were sitting across from me right now? How would I address them? What would I say? Anyways, you can think about that. Is there anything in my diet, my nutrition, my sleep, my fitness that could be causing this? Because anxiety, there are things that cause it in our normal emotional and mental states that things happen, you check it out. But sometimes you're drinking 8 cups of coffee and you're wondering why you're feeling anxious. I'm not trying to throw judgment, but I'm saying if you look, it could be a physical thing. Maybe you quit sleeping because you have, exams coming up, you're sleeping 3 hours and you're existing on almost no food and only caffeine. Your anxiety might be flying. So let's check that. This is good to keep in mind. With that in mind, though, there should be no judgment towards feelings of anxiety. There should be no judgment towards feelings of anxiety because really it's just information. It's beautiful, valuable information that you're getting from your internal world. That was hard to say. Internal world. It's beautiful, valuable information. Information that can lead to growth and self-discovery and your emotional well-being. So treat it like treasure. So how could anxiety, though, lead to emotional well-being? You're telling me that I'm anxious and that's leading me to emotional well-being? I am. Just think if you slowed down long enough to acknowledge the anxiety you're feeling. Okay, let's actually do that. Let's slow down a little bit here. And then you get curious enough to start wondering what the message of that anxiety is. And now that you're curious, you actually have the opportunity to learn and respond to the areas of your life that it's highlighting with kindness and compassion, care and support. These feelings are no longer controlling you, but they're serving you. And I think that's the difference. And I think that's the part where church has been so worried is if you feel anxious, you're being controlled and you're making bad decisions. It's that might be true, and that could have been true, but anxiety is meant to serve us. So I guess just check who's in charge in that moment. Even, you probably wouldn't have the right mind to think it, but if you could kind of prepare for it, who's in charge here in this moment? And now that you actually bring that anxiety that is no longer controlling you and serving you, now you can bring it to God in prayer and you can let him speak to it. You can let him change you in that space and create something new and beautiful. But you couldn't have if you didn't slow down to figure out what the heck it was. So now, anxiety should lead to your emotional well-being. And all of our emotions are a gift from an emotional God. They are not inherently bad. You don't have inherently bad emotions. I actually don't think any. I was arguing with myself earlier because I sound insane, and that's fine. But I was arguing with myself earlier because I was like, well, wait, can really all emotions be neutral? Is that okay? Is that possible? Because what about jealousy? I was trying to think of all the bad ones. What about malice, which I've only read in the Bible? What about those ones? And again, if we decide that emotions are tools of they're a messenger and they're giving us information, then yes, they're all neutral. They're all, if you feel jealousy, it's telling you, hey, why am I jealous of that person? I'm going to get curious about that now and start working through that. So I don't really think there are anything but neutral emotions. There are just some that are a lot better. So there are not, to feel, you know what I mean, they are not inherently bad and are always communicating. So when negative emotions, though, become the navigator or the engine of our experience, our lives will not nearly be as enjoyable or even healthy. So it is important to make space for negative emotions, listen to them, and you're listening to them in order to resolve whatever message they are sending you. Emotions are messages. So if you're struggling with thoughts of insecurity, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not tall enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not talented enough, or maybe I'm too talented, that's a different problem, or whatever, you are not being helped or served by those thoughts. You're not. So now we know that, and the information is really valuable, but it needs to lead to some kind of an action. That should likely mean we begin to get curious about those thoughts and see if they're true, like we talked about, or just your perception. And then by yourself or with others or with God, you invite people into it, and we start to see truth and reality. So like an example, let's say someone might have this thought, no one wants to date me because I'm ugly. Oh. And they're probably, though, including it with like, you don't look at me so closely. They're probably including it with thoughts like, I'm gonna die alone in my apartment with my 2 cats and my 67 plants, and no one will notice for 3 days, and they'll find my body there over the railing because I was calling for help. Oh, that's anxiety, okay? It's drama, but it's anxiety. And so, I know that's kind of weird, but like I said before, these thoughts are messages. And then you know what? We have to check if those messages are true, okay? So like, first of all, we get curious. You know, just to make it not possible, like maybe a few people aren't attracted to you, but a lot of people will be. So first of all, calm down, okay? It's all good. Probably like 3 people were like, nah, but like there's like at least like 8 that are like, yeah. So, okay. So then secondly, what was the other one? Oh, I'm gonna die alone with my cats. Well, maybe you'll actually have dogs, you know? You don't know. Yeah, there's lots of options. So, I'm sorry, but you're not a prophet. You don't know what's gonna happen. So already that one's done too, okay? And just like I said before, these thoughts are just messages, so we need to listen to them, okay? So then we'd get curious. Now I'll pretend this is real again. So I'm really worried about dying alone with my cats and 67 plants, and I'm just so sad that 3 people don't like me. So first, let's get curious. Do I feel worthy of a loving relationship? Ouch. So now, everybody said, I need my journal. Oh, that's so good. And then, so we're gonna write it down. We're gonna think about our thoughts and feelings, put them in front of us, even if you don't like the answers, okay? Because sometimes we don't. Or like, what feelings do I have when I think about my lack of relationship? What are the feelings around that? We're gonna write it down. We're gonna extend kindness to ourselves. Again, this is just information that we're gathering. Or maybe what aspects of who I am do I think are the most attractive? You know what? Actually, what kind of person would be lucky enough to date me? You know, then you have this like reframe. Everybody said yes. And so when you get to those questions at the end, those are the good questions. That means you were working, you were working through that. So like, yeah, but you won't get to those questions if you don't start with the curiosity and the hard ones, okay? You don't get one without the other. You got to work it through. So like, I know it's kind of funny, and like, I guarantee that like at least like 20% of you were like, I will never do that in your mind. A few people just about burst out laughing when I said that, so I know who you are now. But that's totally fine. I would just now offer like one thought is like, get curious why you don't want to look. Because that might say something to you there to check into. So I get it. I was there too. I felt that a lot, but it just works. So what's the difference between normal anxiety and now an anxiety disorder, okay? Because everybody thinks they have an anxiety disorder. And that's fine, you should check. So the difference between normal anxiety and an anxiety disorder, according to the DSM-5, is the extremity and the persistence of enough of the symptoms. So you have to have enough symptoms, they have to be strong enough, and you've had to have them long enough. And that's really the only difference, okay? That's it, from anxiety to generalized anxiety disorder. Those are the 2 things. So it's not really that big of a deal. Having a diagnosed disorder for some people will seem like the answer that could explain everything. That it's like everything I've gone through is because of this. And in some ways, yes, that could help explain that, and likely really would help explain a lot of things. Although in other ways, the diagnosis will really just ensure that you have a lot of work to do in that area around anxiety, and there's a reason you're feeling it. So the diagnosis, much like many mental health diagnoses, is just a defined criteria of what you're experiencing. Like typical anxiety, as you do the work and deal with the causes of the anxiety disorder, and there could be lots of causes, that diagnosis will eventually no longer be true about you, and you'll be a happy, healthy person. So receiving and now this is like where it gets a little tricky, and this is where I really want to be careful, because not every mental health disorder or issue is the same. So in anxiety's case, you absolutely can and should roll through that anxiety into another side. And there are hopefully ways that you can find to disempower that anxiety strength in your life. And maybe medication is a good option for that for a while, but ultimately medication is helping you probably do talk therapy to get through to the other side, or find those changes you need to make, okay? Whereas like depression or bipolar disorder or just things like that, there's just different rules, okay? So don't think that when I'm saying this about anxiety that I'm talking about your totally different concern. It's just not, they're not the same, okay? Just want to make it clear. So regardless of a diagnosis, which can be really helpful to know exactly what's going on, you'll still have to do the work to get to the other side of those challenging emotions. So bearer of bad news on that one. So biblical, yeah, that's all I'll say for that, but it's true. Biblical understanding and experience of anxiety, okay? Biblical understanding. So now we're going to jump into now the theological side of it. So we know what anxiety is. We know that anxiety is that diffused threat of a future thing. It's a totally normal response. We know now what we're dealing with, okay? There's nothing wrong with it. It's helpful. So anxiety is not a problem. It's definitely not a sin. Anxiety is neutral, emotional, mental, physical state of being when something is potentially wrong or unsafe. So how does that work theologically? So I've really heard scriptures like Philippians 4. This is the one I said earlier. Don't be anxious. Can we put, there it is. Do not be anxious about anything. And you're like, okay, now what do I do? Well, in everything, prayer and petition with the thankful heart and present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. That's like, it's really good. And it is a bit prescriptive, but something about that first part has always sat wrong with me. Like, do not be anxious about anything. It's just like telling like someone who's like, I don't know, okay, right now, like don't think about a blue elephant. Impossible. Like you're going to think about a blue elephant. It's like, you can't be like, don't be anxious. Anxious. It's just how it works. So I've always wondered about that. And so with this study I got to do, I was excited because I felt like the level of pastoral care for a person experiencing anxiety to stop being anxious, that just doesn't, I don't know. So it leads me to think that might not be what the scripture is saying. So I looked up that word anxious, and that anxious word comes from the Greek word merimneo. I'm impressed that I just said that. I said merimneo like it was no big deal, and I don't know what I'm doing, which is actually translated, so merimneo, which is the word they use anxious here, it gets translated a few different ways, but what it actually means is to have care for. That's it. So it just is saying, so it says, do not be anxious. It was actually saying, like, watch how much care you have, okay? So this word in itself, you can leave that up there for a bit. So this word in itself, merimneo, or to have care for, is neither something good or bad, okay? It's not that. It's simply saying your care, the level of your inner care about something is probably a little too much, or it's not enough. That's all it's saying. Maybe you're worrying about something too much. He's like, watch that. Like, watch what you're really caring about. Are finances what you're anxious about? Maybe we need some surrendering here. So he's actually being very pastoral in this moment. So I really appreciate that, because Paul tends to be the guy who everyone's like, he just tells you how it is, and that's just all. But it's not really that. He's being very pastoral. And we just kind of miss things. So let's look at it this way. So watch how much care you have for the things in this temporary life. In every situation, bring it to God in prayer and petition him with a sense of gratefulness. And then the peace of God, which is greater than human reasoning, will become a guard to your heart and your minds in Christ Jesus. Does that feel a little bit more on? You know what I mean? So not just don't be anxious, but like watch where your values are. Watch what you're caring about. So this is the way of Jesus. It's to care for the things of the kingdom, the things that God prioritizes. We put more emphasis on kingdom, healthy things, and we put less emphasis on the things that are fading away. That's who we are. Could that mean that Jesus doesn't care about the things we experience? Absolutely not. When Martha was so busy with her hospitality and, she was out there getting things done, and Mary is just over there and she's sitting at the feet of Jesus because she's the better, holier one, but Martha was bad. That's kind of what we get. That's not exactly what happened at all. Martha was so busy with her hospitality, getting upset at everyone else for what? Not caring enough. That was the thing. That's the same word as don't be anxious. Everyone was like, you're caring too much. And so Jesus said that. He said, you're caring too much. He said, Martha, I care about those things, but I care about these things more. Place more of your value over here right now. And he just slowed her down. He wasn't belittling her. He wasn't dismissing her. He's like, Martha, she's choosing the right thing right now. She's valuing really well. Come, value this with us. It was an invitation. So Jesus himself actually experienced what we call anxiety. I can hear it now. No way, not Jesus. He could never have felt anxious. There's no way. Well, he did. If Luke 22:44 is correct, then Jesus absolutely did. In fact, he experienced one of the greatest physical results of anxiety that is even possible. Again, I want to remind everyone before I read this that anxiety is what? It's a normal reaction to stressful situations, ultimately letting you know something is wrong, okay? So again, that is neutral. That can't be bad or good. It's just a heads up. So let's read Luke 22:39-46 here. So Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, I like that. He went there as usual, and reaching the place, like the place where he prayed, he said to them, pray that you will not fall into temptation. So he withdrew about a stone's throw away and knelt down and prayed. And this is what he prayed. He said, Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me, but not my will, yours be done. And as he prayed that, an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. And when he rose from prayer and went back to his disciples, he found they were asleep. They were exhausted from their sorrow. Why are you sleeping? He asked them. He said, get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. And so we know that Jesus, from John 17, we know that he was praying for his disciples. That's not all that he was saying. That's just what Luke records. But John records a really rich and beautiful tapestry kind of prayer where he was praying that as he was in the Father, that they would be in him and that there would be unity in the body. It was this beautiful prayer for us, actually, who would come. And so we know he was concerned about his disciples. He was concerned about his future followers, and also just the ability to endure what was coming. We know this. So when we see that phrase in verse 44, being in anguish, that's a word that's actually only used one time in the New Testament, which I was surprised by. And it's a little confusing because it's only used one time. But what we think that the word means, anguish, which is, I had the last one better, aganoia, I don't know. Aganoia, something like that. It means a severe struggle or emotional state, okay? So, and being in a severe struggle and emotional state, he prayed more earnestly. So we're getting now that is actually a severe mental struggle, I meant to say. A severe mental struggle and emotional state. So remember, anxiety is diffused, widespread, it's future-oriented, it's concerned with what's coming in a physical, emotional, and mental experience. So Jesus, he knew, he had the advantage point that we don't have. Remember I said before that you don't know your future? Jesus actually did know. And that's why he's praying that. I don't know. Is there another way, God? I'll do it, but... And so he had the advantage and disadvantage in that sense of knowing his future. And he knew, and this is where it gets real. He knew that Judas was about to betray him. He knew he was about to not only lose Judas in a betrayal, but Judas was going to kill himself after he did this. So imagine why he's weeping. Imagine why he's in anguish, in mental turmoil. And then he's also knowing Peter's going to betray him. A lot of his followers are going to turn away, and not all of them are going to come back. Satan is going to think that he has the victory for a solid chunk of time. things are not going to be good for a while. And so and not to mention, he has to do this perfectly. There's no room for Jesus to have an error because it's all prophesied. So he not only knows how it has to be and how it will be, but he has to still do it. And that's really hard. But this is the thing. In his state of anxiety, he asked God, all the things we said. And this is it. Yet he was ultimately not redirected by anxiety. Okay? He could have been. Anxiety tries to redirect to the safer route. But he said, I acknowledge, I'm in anguish. And this is what I would prefer, but I won't let this internal mental struggle and emotional state change what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. He didn't let it redirect him. He understood it, he moved through it, and he accomplished everything he set out to do. And I think that is exactly the point we need to be making in theological terms when anxiety presents itself. Anxiety is presenting a choice. It's clear in moments of anxiety that choices are being made. And that's where sin comes in, and I think that's where it gets confusing. If our anxiety can cause us to make poor choices, can cause us to abandon our calling, or downplay our identity in Christ, then we are moving towards sin, okay? So just because you are experiencing anxiety on a theological level, it doesn't allow you to do whatever you want in response to that, unfortunately. So you're still held to the standard of a Christian, of a follower of Jesus, a follower of the way. It doesn't mean you're perfect, doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. We all do. We signed up for this. And yet, we are working through anxiety. We are working through our internal world. And that's okay. But choices have to be made in those moments. So anxiety is not sin, and not like anger is not sin. But the choices that are being made of anxiety, that's where it comes in. So it's interesting, when Jesus sweat drops of blood, that condition is called hematohydrosis. And it is actually a condition, it's real, it's a thing, it's documented in history, and actually it's documented fairly recently. And the cause is considered to be, get this, extreme anxiety in dangerous situations. Interesting. Now, just for fun, I looked up on WebMD what the treatment would be for somebody experiencing blood dripping from their bodies, from the inside of their bodies out. And it said, it actually had this is hilarious. They should take anti-anxiety medication and do talk therapy. I'm like, if I have blood coming out of my arms, you better give me that anti-anxiety medication. But that's what it said, and I thought that was really interesting. So I did actually look at some studies, and that is the case. It's going to be treated just like any other extreme anxiety is going to be treated. So there are other documented cases, and the thread is the same. It's a physical reaction to extreme situations. So it's safe to say that God, the God who made you, and the God who died for you, and the God who rose again for you, is also the one who understands your anxiety. And he understands everything that you face. And I'm so thankful for that. I want to just share a little bit about my own journey with anxiety. I've experienced anxiety quite a lot, actually. I don't think it defines me as my major testimony, but yet at the same time, it has been something that is an ongoing struggle. It's a hard part for me at times. And I remember it was in the beginning of 2021, the year after COVID, when it's now we're supposed to be good now because we're done that stuff. We're not locked in our house as much. And so in my mind, I'm yeah, here we go. We're out and about. And I was feeling so much anxiety. I didn't really know what it was. I just felt tense, and I felt unsettled, and my thoughts were really always racy. And I remember actually this time, I fainted in my bathroom. I was home by myself, and I fainted in my bathroom, and I woke up, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And it was really scary. And then my chest started hurting, and I was am I having a heart attack? Am I dying? And I was really scared. And my mental health kind of started to deteriorate with that, because then I was really worried, and anxiety started to become, like I said, the driving factor. It was the force in my life. It was the one making the decisions, and I felt like I was just kind of along for the ride. And I remember I went to my doctor, and because I wanted to start working things out, because for me, it wasn't anxiety, it was physical. I'm having chest pain. I woke up not being able to breathe, and I've been passing out. And I at that point, I'm well, my dog's gonna save me? This is not going well. I'm the guy who dies at home with his dogs. Oh my gosh. Oh, that came back. I didn't expect that. So went to my doctor, And I was like, I'm experiencing these physical problems, like my heart is not good or something. And so he took it really seriously, and I really appreciated it. And we did all these tests. We did like a heart check. We did literally all the tests you can actually think of, from like MRIs to brain scans. And we're trying to figure this out because it was really serious for me. And everything came back negative, which actually made it worse for me, because I'm like, well, then what is it? You know, like I'm really not doing good. And now you're saying there's nothing wrong with me, but you are clearly incorrect. Like, I don't know if you know how to look at symptoms and then make a diagnosis, but that is not working. And so I was getting frustrated, and I started to realize, because I did a little bit of looking into anxiety, and I started to realize, like, maybe there's actually more going on. So I looked into it, and so I went back to the doctor, still extreme, because I'm still feeling all this stuff, and I was like, is there any way that you could give me anxiety medication? Because I just can't do this anymore. And I kind of just like gave up. And I really appreciated his response. I did not appreciate his response at the time, actually. I was upset. But he said, I can prescribe something for the anxiety attacks, like just for when they happen. For the ongoing sense of anxiety that you're looking at, though, it would have to be like antidepressants. And you'll be on those for a really long time, and I don't even know if they'll work for you. So I need you to explore some talk therapy and some other options before we even go down that road. And I was so upset, because I'm like, you're dismissing me. But he wasn't. He was right. He was 100% right. And I didn't even take the medication for the attacks because I was frustrated. And I was like, thank you, have a good day. Because I'm Canadian and I would never do that. So I didn't take it, and I just started to get real. Honestly, I had to, because I had no other choice. And I couldn't even really afford like therapy. Like a counselor tends to be pretty pricey. As we all know, we all want to go, and then it's like $200, are you sure? So I felt pretty alone and misunderstood, and I didn't know how I was going to get out of this constant fight or flight feeling. It was hard. And I began doing the only thing I could at the time, which was journaling. So I started journaling just to get my mind to calm down and slow down. That's what I wanted. So I would journal like, okay, slow down, and you're still feeling everything, but like, okay, what am I actually anxious about right now? Like, what is it? And so I just write down anything that came to mind. And then I wouldn't say that I felt really better, but it was a tiny bit clearer. And then, well, what feelings am I actually feeling right now? I write those down. And so then I started to ask, like, God, what are you actually saying to me in this space? And so I invited God into it. And what am I trying to control right now that I need to give over to God? And start writing those down. And I did that a lot. It was my only thing that I could think of at first. But then I quit caffeine for a year. I'm like, I should see if that would help. It did. I started to work on my self-talk, like my internal dialogue. I started doing these things. This one's going to sound a little funny, but I started doing these gratitude walks where I would walk my dogs. Again, I didn't die in my apartment, so that was good. And that was my first thing I was thankful for. Thank you, I didn't die in my apartment. But no, I would do these gratitude walks, and I would just think of things on my walk, like for 20 minutes, like what can be thankful for? Like, I'm thankful that I actually have time to do this right now. And just let it roll wherever it goes. It's actually harder than you think it would be. But it's a practice that you get better at. And so I just tell God things I'm thankful for, and I started to value diet and exercise again. And one big area for me was I told some close friends about it. They even would check in and ask how it was going. And specifically at that time, it was my friend Blessing. She would check in with me. She was so great. And I would check in with her too. She had her own things going on. And so we met up this time because we were going to songwrite. And we both just kind of like laid out our like current states that we were coming in at. And we're both like feeling it, when you're in it. And it's not easy. And so after we did that, then she's like, hey, I've been working on this song, actually, and it was Overall, this one we wrote together. And she showed me the first line, and the first line she'd already wrote was, over all anxiety, over all uncertainty, over what tomorrow brings, you are. And I felt such an emotional connection in that moment, and we had to finish it. It was like that, and we did. We finished it that night, and we made plans to record it. And it was like an amazing little moment where like my sense of anxiety got to get turned into something kind of beautiful. And that was like the first time I really saw that. And so little by little, those types of expressions, those types of honoring what you're feeling and giving it airtime helped me a lot. And I don't want to like make you think that you have to do what I do. But now I'm in the space where it's like I'm doing really good in most ways with anxiety, but sometimes it really pops its head up. I'm in grad school, I am, working, I'm doing like volunteer stuff like this all the time, and I have relationships that really matter to me, and there's a lot going on, lots of responsibilities. And so sometimes I still feel that. But now I have this point where I'm like, okay, I can slow this down and check in. And I'm so thankful. Honestly, relationships are just the most important thing you can have. If you can have a relationship that will check in with you and like, hey, how are you doing? Or you could be like, you know what? I'm just going to tell them I'm not doing good so they know. That is the best. That is what you want. If your relationships aren't like that, maybe start making them like that. Maybe start being the one to offer that moment of vulnerability and see if it'll be reciprocated. And if not, maybe find some people who would. But I feel like you'd be surprised, most likely, that people want that as well. And honestly, I'm so lucky. I feel like I made all my best friends in my 30s. It's crazy. So I don't have like a tidy message of like, no, anxiety is gone and everything's great. But anxiety is helpful now, and it's more manageable, and it's something that I'm getting informed by, and it's not running the show. So if we could just put up those tools. So these are the tools I wanted to show you. So if you're experiencing anxiety in this place, these are just some very general options to just consider. Talk therapy, that's just talking to a counselor or a therapist or a psychologist, and getting in there and into the dirt and the mud and just, this is what's going on. It's the best. If you can't afford that or you can't find a good option for that, there are free options, and they call it sliding scale. If you ever see that, that means they'll come down to your level of what you can afford often. So watch for that. But also, you could do that with a pastor. There's room for that. They're great. They like you. They love you. There's some good ones around here. There's an older guy named Cliff. He's amazing. Talk to him. Yeah, totally. I agree. Or find a good friend that you trust. That's even helpful. Something. Medication is an absolute option if it's at that point where you're like, I need that help. That's excellent to use. Journaling and processing, you already heard that one from me. You can do journaling however works for you. Journaling for me looks like asking myself questions or asking God questions. That's what journaling is for me. It's a processing tool is really all it is. But some people do it differently, and you can do it however you like. Gratitude practices. When you do gratitude practices, it literally changes the chemistry in your brain. Just something simple as being thankful will literally change the current mood that you're in. And that's like, for some people, they're like, that's not good enough. I need real answers. But it's like, the answers are simple. I'm sorry, but if you find the ability to be thankful, that part of your like fight or flight will calm down. It's great. Self-care, take care of yourself. Exercise. He says nothing else. Exercise. Whatever that looks like for you, whatever you like doing. Nutrition, eat good things. Maybe less of the bad things, whatever that is for you. Just do get curious. What is going to work for you, okay? And then sufficient sleep. Check that. Meditation practices. You can meditate however works for you. People get kind of hung up on that. David meditated more than anybody, so I feel like you're good. Prayer practices, just like talking to God and making space for genuine prayer, and maybe with other people. Those are the things I think, if you start there, and like I said, just getting curious about why those things are there, you'll have a great time. So we're going to start winding down. If the worship team wants to come, that'd be amazing, if we could be graced with them. I know tonight there's been a lot of information. I am totally aware that I've kind of, it's kind of like, I had a friend, we were at this water park, the one in Edmonton, and I wasn't sure if he was going to like water parks. I didn't know if he was built for them, and he liked it, and he came down that slide, and the lifeguard was here, and he just, the water, it was like, whew. So I feel like that's kind of what I did to you guys tonight, was just I came down the water slide a little hot, and I was kind of going sideways, and I just gave you too much information. But I think you're like, I don't know why he said that, and neither does he. So we all, so good. We all experience anxiety. Every single one of us do. We're not immune to it. From time to time, that's completely fine. But when anxiety becomes overwhelming, we need to reach out and we need to invite other people into it. You and I are not meant to do life alone. That's one of the first biblical lessons in the garden, is that you're not meant to be alone. And sometimes we forget that. We isolate, and then what happens when we isolate? Our intrusive thoughts, our negative thoughts, our emotions become unbearable. And that's why anxiety is often found coupled with things like depression. It's usually, a lot of the time when it gets to be in a diagnosable range, you're getting more than one diagnosis, it can be. So anxiety is giving us information, but when we're not listening, we're not curious, anxiety can begin to influence our lives in really unhelpful ways. So do you guys want to stand with me? I've had to stand, you guys can stand. No, I'm just kidding. Could we put that QR code on the sides? Would that be possible? So we are going to do a Q&R after this. I feel like some of you are like, you talked so much, I have no more questions in my life. But for those of you who are interested in having some questions and want some response on them, just scan that and ask your questions on that, or just stick around and you can ask them in person. So just wanted to throw a reminder that we're going to do that. But what I want to do is I want to make space for real human connection and real God connection. Because I feel like it would be a disservice to anyone who came in here struggling with mental health, which automatically isolates people, to let them go back home like that, and to let us go back home like that. So I want to make time for that. So if the ministry team wants to come up and just kind of get all settled in. And for those of you who are watching online, I just really encourage you to reach out to somebody. If you're watching this right now, please text someone or phone someone or something. Maybe this week, go for coffee with somebody. And let this be a moment for you of connection. But for now, let's also connect with the Lord.